Joining me now is Tim Parlatore. He served as Donald Trump's attorney before his resignation back in June. Tim Parlatore's resignation, not Donald Trump's. Tim, it's really great to have you. I'm curious, this idea that Donald Trump might go out and his legal team and argue advice of counsel against these charges, do you expect them to do that? And if so, would you be worried about that opening up all that lawyer discovery?
You know, advice of counsel is a very narrow defense. I think that they're going to try and go a little bit broader than that to really just attack the underlying criminal intent and really going into what his knowledge is. The fact that he was told that there was fraud, whether by attorneys or by investigators or by other people, it is a bit broader than just simply an advice of counsel defense the way that I see it. Of course, this case is kind of interesting because the attorneys that he would assert advice of counsel with are there as his co-defendants. That's a very different situation than you would normally have.
It's very different. Talking about believing fraud and intent and state of mind, there is one note, and we just mentioned it a moment ago with Lisa Rubin, in the first act against racketeering listed here in this indictment. And I'll remind us, it mentions an October 31st discussion about a draft speech with another unindicted co-conspirator that talks about falsely declaring victory and falsely claiming voter fraud. This is even before the election happened. So when you're talking about state of mind, his state of mind seems to suggest from this indictment that he was preparing to say that he won no matter what.
Well, and that's part of the problem with indictments is that it gives part of the story. Was that the only version of the speech that was prepared ahead of time, or did they actually prepare, 3 or 4 different versions, and that's the one that they happened to pick that matched the facts as they developed? I don't know. Presumably they had another one that said, that he won by a landslide and he was very happy. That's just the nature of indictments, is that they're only putting in part of the facts. So we're going to have to see how that one develops.
When we talk about the lawyers here, some of those who are indicted co-conspirators are Sidney Powell and John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani. And Mike Pence on the campaign trail has been referring to them as his crackpot lawyers. What do you think about some of the lawyering that went on in this case leading up to these indictments?
I mean, look, you can always sit there after the fact and pick apart things that lawyers have done. I will tell you this, based on my representation of multiple people, not just the president, but also Bernie Kerik, I will say that Sidney Powell is one of those lawyers that everything I've seen, she was putting out theories that she didn't have any backup for. And that was actually one of the things that, this indictment makes it seem like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell were shoulder to shoulder. Everything I've seen is actually quite the opposite, where Rudy Giuliani was trying to push her out because she was pushing theories that she had no backup for. So I do think that that is a split that you're going to see kind of develop a little bit more fully as this progresses. And also it's something that's relevant to the Jack Smith D.C. indictment, is kind of the difference between what the Sidney Powell team was doing and what the Giuliani team was doing.
And I just want to pause that you brought it up, that are you now still representing Bernie Kerik? I knew you had been in the January 6th case, the federal case.
Let me ask you about the statement that Donald Trump...
Mr. Kerik and I sat with special counsel last week.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything you care to reveal about the status of that?
Sure. We sat with them for about 5 hours. We sat with them for about 5 hours. We went through all of the efforts that the Giuliani team undertook during that period of time to try and find fraud. What was preventing them from being able to go further, what they did, to try and corroborate these claims, and certain claims that when they found out there wasn't corroboration for, that they dropped out. And so, we went through all that with them.
I want to ask you about...
And if they want to talk more, we'll be back.
This effort to continue to try to find some sort of fraud that happened in 2020, because Donald Trump put it out there this morning. He's going to have this press conference. He's going to reveal all. Suddenly, all these charges are going to be rendered moot because of this new information he has, ignoring the fact that I think there was 62 lawsuits were filed, and basically 61 of them said there's no there there. Is this a political statement, not a legal statement? Do you see anything? Do you have knowledge of anything that would indicate that there could be something to say there was fraud in the 2020 election?
I don't know what his Truth Social post was referring to. Yeah, I will tell you that what Mr. Kerik has always been very consistent on is that the evidence that he saw of fraud in the 2020 election was just the beginnings of it. You know, they found what amounted to what he calls probable cause to believe that there may have been fraud in the election that warranted further investigation by state or federal authorities to be able to conclusively prove or disprove those allegations. You know, that is what, you know, basically all of my clients have consistently had, is the probable cause piece of it, you know, that there were inconsistencies. Some of these things, for example, were based on an initial analysis of the voter data that was put up on the Secretary of State's websites. And unfortunately, because of lack of funding, the Giuliani team wasn't able to hire more experts to be able to corroborate those numbers and double check the math. And so they went on the information that they had at the time. And, you know, would further investigation been able to, you know, confirm that or conclusively disprove that? Probably. But that was the information they had.
So you're saying this was all about resources. Rudy Giuliani didn't have the resources. You also mentioned a moment ago, and I'd just like to get you to explain a little bit more on it, that Rudy Giuliani thought Sidney Powell was not a good lawyer and that he was trying to distance himself from her. Where did that happen? I don't remember seeing a lot of distancing between the two of them.
So it started after that press conference at the RNC, where she started making claims that they couldn't back up. And, you know, that's why they had initially kind of pushed her out and said she's not part of the team. It then went to the December meeting at the White House, where Rudy Giuliani was called in because Sidney Powell was there, you know, pushing again some of these theories, such as having DOD seize the voting machines. Rudy Giuliani was called in, and he told the president that's an absolutely crazy idea. Absolutely not. And as I understand it, President Trump kind of joked that this is the first time Pat Cipollone and Rudy Giuliani agreed on something. So, you know, he was going to go with it.
Is there documentation of that?
Of course. I don't know if there's any written documentation, but there were multiple eyewitnesses to that. And that's the meeting where, at the end of it, she was barred from the White House along with Mike Flynn and Patrick Byrne.
And let me just quickly tie up something. I'm not an attorney, don't even play one on TV. You left something hanging out there about Mr. Kerik, former, of course,
yes,
police commissioner in New York City, who had actually served time on a completely unrelated charge. Is there any chance that he is cooperating?
He is being cooperative. He does not have any criminal exposure himself, so it's not like he needs a cooperation agreement. But he is providing information to the special counsel, as he will provide information to the defense team relevant to both of their cases, to ensure that what is presented in court is the full and honest information about what happened during that period of time. So I would say, you know, cooperating is kind of a loaded term. He's being cooperative.